A CEO with a reputation for closing billion-dollar deals sits alone in an elegant restaurant, watching rain streak down the windows. This is his last blind date, ever. He's done with women who want access to his world, not him. But when Harper arrives late, rain-soaked, carrying a worn satchel and zero interest in impressing him, something shifts. She looks him dead in the eye and says, "I'm not here to audition. Can we skip the charade and talk like actual people?" In that moment, every defense he's built starts to crack. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Bellissimo, streaking the glass like tears the city refused to shed. Jensen Long sat at his usual corner table, the one that offered a view of the glittering skyline and strategic distance from other diners. His charcoal Tom Ford suit was immaculate, his dark hair perfectly styled, his gold Patek Philippe catching the amber glow of the chandelier overhead. At 36, he'd mastered the art of appearing utterly composed while feeling absolutely nothing. He checked his watch. 7:47 p.m. She was already 17 minutes late. Perfect. He could leave at 8:15 with a clear conscience and tell Marcus he'd tried. One last blind date. That's what he'd promised his business partner 3 days ago, when Marcus cornered him in the Long Enterprises boardroom, wearing that infuriatingly hopeful expression. "Just meet her, Jen. Harper's different." Different. Jensen had heard that word attached to at least a dozen women over the past 5 years. Different meant they'd researched his net worth before dessert. Different meant they'd already picked out which penthouse they'd redecorate. Different meant they'd calculated exactly how impressive dating Jensen Long, CEO, would look on their social media. The last one, Vanessa, had lasted 3 months before he'd overheard her on the phone describing him as a bit cold, but the vacation house in Aspen makes up for it. He'd ended it that night. She'd cried, insisted she loved him. He'd written her a check just to make her leave faster. That was 8 months ago. Since then, nothing. No dates, no expectations, no disappointments. Just quarterly reports, acquisition meetings, and the kind of success that looked impressive in Forbes, but felt hollow at 2 a.m. when he was alone in his apartment, overlooking a city full of people who wanted things from him. Marcus didn't understand. Marcus had married his college sweetheart, had 2 kids, coached Little League on weekends. Marcus still believed in love like it was something real, something attainable for people like Jensen, who'd built empires but forgotten how to build connections. "She's an environmental consultant," Marcus had said. "Smart, passionate, doesn't care about money. She actually argued with me about corporate sustainability practices for 40 minutes. I think you'll find her challenging." Jensen didn't want challenging. He wanted predictable. He wanted this 30-minute obligation to end so he could return to his office and review the Singapore contracts. He wanted to stop pretending that somewhere out there was a woman who'd see past the CEO title, past the wealth, past the carefully constructed armor he'd built after realizing that everyone had an agenda. The restaurant door opened, bringing a gust of wind and rain. A woman stumbled in, wrestling with a modest black umbrella that had clearly lost its battle with the storm. Her blue wrap dress was damp at the shoulders, her brown hair falling in soft, rain-dampened waves around her face. She carried a worn leather satchel that had seen better years, and her shoes, sensible flats, not designer heels, squeaked slightly on the marble floor. She looked completely, utterly out of place in Bellissimo's refined elegance. And she looked directly at him with eyes that held no trace of the calculated charm he'd learned to expect. Jensen stood out of ingrained politeness as she approached. "Harper Wilson?" "Jensen Long." She didn't phrase it as a question. "I'm sorry, I'm late. The subway was delayed, and then the rain—" She stopped herself, shaking her head slightly. "Actually, no. I'm not going to start this by apologizing for public transportation and weather I can't control. He blinked. Excuse me? This. She gestured at the opulent restaurant, the crystal chandeliers, the sommelier hovering nearby with a wine list. This is beautiful, but it's not me at all. And I'm guessing Marcus told you I was different, which probably means every woman you've dated has tried very hard to fit into places exactly like this. Jensen felt something crack in his carefully maintained composure. You're very direct. I'm tired, Harper said simply, sitting down without waiting for him to pull out her chair. I'm 27 years old. I've spent the last 3 years being dismissed as too young or too idealistic in meetings with men who think environmental consulting is a hobby, not a career. I've dated men who wanted a girlfriend who'd make them look good at dinner parties, who'd be impressed by expensive restaurants and talk about how successful they are. I've smiled through conversations where I wasn't really seen, just evaluated. She met his eyes steadily, and Jensen saw something there he recognized. Exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of performing for people who didn't actually care. So here's the thing, Harper continued. Marcus said, you're more than your reputation. He said underneath the cold CEO exterior, there's someone genuine who's tired of pretense. But this restaurant suggests otherwise. This is a performance space. This is where you bring people you want to impress or keep at arm's length. Which do you think you are? Jensen heard himself ask. I think I'm someone who agreed to one last blind date before giving up entirely, Harper said. Just like you. So can we skip the performance and go somewhere we can actually talk like humans? Because I'm not here to audition for the role of trophy girlfriend, and you're clearly not interested in getting to know anyone who might actually want to know you. Outside, thunder rumbled. Inside, Jensen Long felt the fortress he'd built start to crack. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he wanted to repair it. There's a wine bar 3 blocks from here, he said slowly. It's quiet. No chandeliers. Harper smiled, genuinely smiled, and something in Jensen's chest tightened. Then, what are we still doing here? They stayed at Bellissimo just long enough for Jensen to settle the bill for the table he'd reserved. The maître d' looked scandalized when they left without ordering, but Jensen found he didn't care. Harper was already at the door, rewrapping her scarf against the rain, and something about her casual dismissal of a restaurant where people waited months for reservations made him want to follow. The walk to Amelie's wine bar took 7 minutes through rain-slicked streets. Jensen's Italian leather shoes weren't designed for puddles, and his suit jacket darkened with rain. But Harper seemed entirely unbothered, her worn flats navigating the wet pavement with practiced ease. You're uncomfortable, she observed as they turned onto a quieter street. I'm fine. You keep tugging your collar. You've done it 3 times since we left. Jensen stopped tugging his collar. You're very observant. I'm a consultant. I get paid to read people. Harper glanced at him, raindrops catching in her hair. You hide behind that suit and title. What are you afraid people will see? The question landed like a physical blow. Jensen had fielded thousands of questions in boardrooms, from journalists, from investors who wanted to know his strategy, his vision, his 5-year plan. No one had ever asked him what he was hiding. That's a presumptuous question for someone I met 20 minutes ago. Is it wrong? They reached Amelie's, a small neighborhood wine bar with exposed brick walls and mismatched furniture that looked like it had been collected from estate sales. So different from Bellissimo. It might as well have been a different city. Harper pushed open the door, bringing warmth and the scent of aged wood and red wine. Inside, Jensen was absurdly overdressed. His designer suit stood out against the casual patrons in jeans and sweaters. Harper, even in her damp dress, looked like she belonged. She chose a corner table near the window, where rain traced patterns on the glass. "You didn't answer my question," she said once they'd ordered. "A Malbec for her, a cab for him." Jensen studied her, really looked at her, not the way he'd assessed women in the past, cataloging their designer labels and calculating their motives. Harper had no designer labels. Her dress was simple, probably from a department store. Her jewelry was minimal, small silver earrings, no rings. Her eyes were direct, intelligent, waiting. "Everyone wants something from me," he said finally. "Business partners want deals, friends want investments, women want—" He trailed off, suddenly aware how bitter he sounded. "Want your lifestyle," Harper finished. "Want to be Mrs. Jensen Long, CEO. Want the penthouse and the private jet and the Instagram perfect life. Yes. So, you've built this fortress of success where no one can reach the actual person. But here's the thing, Jensen. You're trapped inside it, and you're lonely." The wine arrived. Jensen took a long drink, using the moment to steady himself. "That's quite an assessment. Am I wrong?" "No." The admission surprised him. "You're not wrong, but that doesn't mean letting people in is safe. It just means they get close enough to take more." Harper leaned back, considering him. Who is Jensen Long when he's not closing deals? What did you care about before quarterly earnings became your entire identity? No one had asked him that in 15 years. Jensen's father had built Long Enterprises from nothing, had died expecting his son to expand the empire. Jensen had done exactly that, tripling the company's value, acquiring competitors, making brilliant moves that earned him covers on business magazines. He'd become exactly what everyone expected, and somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten who he'd wanted to be. "I used to care about ocean conservation," he said quietly. "In college, I volunteered with marine rescue, spent weekends cleaning beaches, helping with rehabilitation programs for injured seals. I was going to study marine biology." He laughed without humor. "That feels like a different lifetime, a different person." "What happened?" "My father died. Someone had to run the company. I was 24, and suddenly I was responsible for 3,000 employees and shareholders who expected growth. There wasn't time for anything else." "There's always time," Harper said gently. "You chose not to make time because it was easier to bury yourself in work than deal with grief and responsibility and the pressure of everyone's expectations." Jensen stared at her. "You don't pull punches, do you? Would you prefer I lie, tell you you're doing great, while you suffocate in a life that doesn't fit you anymore?" Harper took a sip of wine. "This version of you is more interesting than the CEO in the fancy restaurant. This version admits he's lost. That takes courage. Or stupidity. I don't usually confess existential crises to strangers." "We're not strangers anymore, Jen." The nickname hit him unexpectedly. "No one's called me Jen since college." Harper tilted her head. "Do you want me to stop?" He should say yes, should maintain the professional distance, the formality that kept people at arm's length. Instead, he heard himself say, "No, don't stop." Something shifted in her expression. Warmth, recognition, the beginning of real connection. "Tell me about the men who wanted to mentor you," Jensen said, surprising himself with genuine curiosity. Harper smiled ruefully. "They saw a 27-year-old woman, passionate about environmental work, and assumed I was naive. Idealistic, sweet. They wanted to guide me, protect me from the harsh realities of business. What they really meant was they wanted someone who'd smile and nod and make them feel important." She traced the rim of her wine glass. "They never saw me as an equal. Never asked my opinion and actually listened. They wanted a fantasy, the young, earnest environmentalist they could shape. That must have been infuriating. It was exhausting. Same as your women who want your money must be exhausting. Different version, same problem. Being valued for what we represent instead of who we are. Jensen felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not the calculated interest he'd felt for beautiful women who said the right things. Not the cynical evaluation of whether someone was worth his time. Something rawer, curiosity, hope, maybe, though he barely recognized it. I had lunch with a potential investor last week, Harper continued. He spent 45 minutes explaining environmental regulations to me. I have a master's degree in environmental science. I've published 3 papers. But he saw a young woman and assumed ignorance. What did you do? I let him finish, then corrected every single point he'd gotten wrong. He didn't call back. Jensen laughed, actually laughed, surprising himself. When was the last time he genuinely laughed? Good for you. My mentor would say I should have been more diplomatic. Your mentor is probably wrong. They talked for 2 hours. The wine bar filled and emptied around them, rain continuing its steady percussion against the windows. Harper told him about her work restoring coral reefs, her frustration with corporate greenwashing, her dream of creating real systemic change. Jensen found himself sharing things he never discussed. The pressure of his father's legacy, the loneliness of success, the way he'd stopped recognizing himself somewhere around his 30th birthday. We saved each other tonight, Harper said as they finally stood to leave, the wine bar preparing to close. From what? From our last blind dates, from giving up on finding someone who actually sees us. She pulled on her jacket, met his eyes. This won't be our only date, will it, Jen? He should be cautious, should maintain distance, protect himself from inevitable disappointment. Instead, Jensen heard himself say, "No, this definitely won't be our only date." Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glistening. And for the first time in years, Jensen Long felt something other than empty. The first gift Jensen tried to give Harper was a pair of diamond earrings. She returned them the next day with a note. I prefer the silver ones I already have. They remind me of my grandmother. The second was dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant. She met him there, slid her credit card across the table before the check arrived, and said firmly, "We split this, or I'm not coming to another dinner." Harper, I can afford... I know what you can afford, Jen. That's not the point. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but unyielding. You're hiding in spreadsheets and expense accounts because feelings are messier than numbers. I won't let you buy your way through this relationship. So they split checks. They ate at taco trucks and neighborhood bistros. And slowly, carefully, Jensen began to remember what it felt like to connect with someone who wanted his time, not his money. Harper brought him into her world without apology. The first beach cleanup was on a gray Saturday morning, and Jensen showed up in clothes he'd ordered online, jeans that still had creases from the package, a plain t-shirt that felt foreign against his skin. Harper handed him work gloves and a trash bag without ceremony. "Welcome to the unglamorous side of environmental work," she said, grinning. For 5 hours, Jensen picked up plastic bottles, cigarette butts, and tangled fishing line. His back ached, his hands cramped, and he felt more alive than he had in a decade. Harper's colleagues treated him like Harper's boyfriend, not Jensen Long, CEO. They argued with him about corporate responsibility, challenged his assumptions about sustainable business practices, asked his opinion, and then disagreed when they thought he was wrong. Your colleagues just spent 2 hours arguing with me about environmental responsibility, he told Harper afterward, slightly dazed. It was uncomfortable, It was necessary. She kissed his cheek. Welcome to what it feels like to be seen as a person, not a position. He funded her organization's coral reef restoration project anonymously, transferring the money through a shell account so she wouldn't know. He learned the names of her team members: Maria, who studied marine ecosystems; David, who'd left a corporate law job to do field work; Priya, who'd survived cancer and decided life was too short not to fight for what mattered. He felt like he was waking up from a 15-year sleep. 6 months in, the real test came. The annual Long Enterprises Gala, black tie, champagne. The city's elite gathered to network and be seen. Jensen brought Harper, who wore a simple black dress she'd owned for years and looked beautiful and completely out of place. He watched her discomfort grow as women in couture dresses assessed her with practiced smiles. Watched her shrink slightly when a board member's wife asked, "And what do you do, dear?" with thinly veiled condescension. "I'm an environmental consultant," Harper said quietly. "How quaint." The woman turned to Jensen. "Darling, you must bring her to our charity luncheon. We're raising money for urban gardens. I'm sure she'd find it fascinating." The dismissal was surgical. Harper's expertise reduced to a hobby, her passion to something quaint. Jensen felt the familiar instinct to smooth things over, maintain harmony, protect his image. Then he looked at Harper's face and made a choice. "Actually, Carol, Harper runs a coral reef restoration project that's been featured in 3 scientific journals. She's consulted for the UN on sustainable development. I'd be happy to introduce you if you're genuinely interested in environmental work rather than patronizing someone you've decided isn't worth your time." The silence was nuclear. Carol's smile froze. Several people turned to stare. Harper's eyes widened. "Excuse me," Carol said coldly, walking away. In the aftermath, 3 couples stopped speaking to him. A board member sent a concerned email about maintaining professional relationships. Marcus called, half worried, half laughing. "Did you really call out Carol Richardson at the gala?" "Yes," Jensen said simply, "and I'd do it again." Harper cried that night in his apartment, not from hurt, but from relief. "I thought I wasn't enough for your world." "You're not supposed to fit my world," Jensen said, pulling her close. "You've shown me my world is too small." The final test came 2 weeks later, a development deal worth $40 million. Luxury hotels on coastal land, guaranteed returns, environmentally devastating. The old Jensen would have signed without hesitation. The new Jensen stared at the contracts and felt sick. Harper didn't tell him what to do. She simply said, "This is your choice. I need to know if the person I'm falling for is real or temporary." Jensen turned down the deal, proposed an alternative: eco-resorts with minimal environmental impact, coral reef conservation built into the development plan, local community partnerships. The profit margin was smaller. The shareholders were skeptical. He'd never felt more certain of anything. Harper's response wasn't dramatic. She just looked at him with quiet pride and said, "I knew you would, not because of me, because of who you actually are." And Jensen realized she was right. He wasn't becoming someone new. He was remembering who he'd been before he'd forgotten how to feel anything at all. 1 year to the day after their first date, Jensen brought Harper back to the beach where everything had truly begun. Not the upscale restaurant where they'd met, but the windswept stretch of sand where they'd walked after leaving the wine bar that first night, talking until 2 a.m. while the ocean roared its approval. The sky was performing the same drama it had a year ago, storm clouds gathering on the horizon, sunset painting everything gold and crimson, waves crashing with elemental force. Harper walked beside him barefoot, her sundress whipping in the wind, her hair loose and wild. She looked exactly like she had that first night, untamed, authentic, completely herself. "You're nervous," she observed, squeezing his hand. "That obvious? You've been quiet for 20 minutes. You're never quiet." She stopped walking, turned to face him. "Jen, what's going on?" He'd rehearsed this a dozen times, practiced in front of his bathroom mirror like a teenager preparing for prom. But now, with Harper looking at him with those clear, knowing eyes, every prepared word evaporated. "A year ago, I was done," he said simply. "Done with people, done with trust, done with hoping anyone would see past the suit and the title. I'd convinced myself that connection wasn't for people like me, that success and loneliness were the price of each other, and I'd chosen success." Harper's expression softened, but she didn't interrupt. "Then you showed up 15 minutes late and rain-soaked and refused to be impressed by anything except authenticity. You didn't let me hide. You saw through every defense I'd built and demanded I remember who I was before I became what everyone expected." The wind picked up, carrying the salt spray taste of the ocean. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "You dragged me to beach cleanups and made me defend my business practices to your colleagues. You refused my gifts and split every check and called me out when I tried to buy my way through emotions." Jensen's voice cracked slightly. "You didn't save me from loneliness, Harper. You saved me from forgetting why connection matters at all." Tears were streaming down Harper's face, mixing with the sea spray. "Jen, I don't have a ring yet," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket and opening it to reveal nothing. "Because I don't want to choose it alone. I want us to design it together. I want it to be something real, not something expensive meant to impress you." Harper laughed through her tears, the sound bright and broken and beautiful. "I'm asking you to marry me," Jensen said, his voice steady now, certain. "I'm asking you to keep challenging me, keep seeing through my walls, keep refusing to let me hide in spreadsheets and quarterly earnings. I promise to keep choosing authenticity over image, to keep fighting for what matters, to keep being Jen for you, not Jensen Long, CEO, for everyone else." Harper pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking. When she finally looked at him, her expression was radiant despite the tears. "That night was supposed to be my last blind date too," she said softly. "I was so exhausted by men who saw my age and assumed naivete, who saw a woman in environmental work and assumed I needed guidance instead of partnership. I was done performing for people who'd never actually see me." She took his hands, gripping tight. "Then I met you, this cold, guarded man in an expensive suit who was so obviously miserable. And instead of running, I stayed. Because underneath all that armor, I saw someone who'd forgotten how to be himself. Someone who needed exactly what I needed, to be seen as equal, as real, as worthy beyond the labels. You saw through my walls before I'd even finished building new ones," Jensen said. "You didn't rescue me, Jen. You saw me as an equal and challenged me to demand that from everyone. You funded my project without telling me. You learned my colleagues' names and actually listened when they challenged you. You chose integrity over $40 million. Harper stepped closer until they were nearly touching. You chose growth over comfort, again and again. That's not rescue. That's partnership." The first drops of rain began to fall, warm and insistent. "So yes," Harper said, laughing and crying simultaneously. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, we'll design the ring together. Yes, to building a life where we keep challenging each other to be authentic. Yes, to all of it." Jensen kissed her as the storm broke overhead, rain soaking them both while waves crashed their applause. They stood on that beach, the same beach where they'd talked until dawn a year ago, and held each other while the sky opened up. Two people who'd been planning their last blind dates had found each other instead. Two fortresses had crumbled, revealing the humans inside who'd been waiting all along to be truly seen. The storm raged around them, and neither of them had ever felt more at home. They married 6 months later on the same beach where Jensen had proposed, barefoot in the sand with 50 people who actually knew them. No crystal chandeliers, no designer gown that cost more than most people's cars, no performance for social media or society pages. Just Harper in a simple white dress that moved with the ocean breeze, Jensen in linen pants and a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and vows they'd written themselves while sitting on his apartment floor eating takeout. Marcus stood as best man, his toast bringing tears and laughter in equal measure. "I've known Jensen for 15 years, he said, voice thick with emotion. I watched him build an empire and lose himself in the process. I watched him date women who wanted his portfolio, not his heart. I watched him decide, finally, that he was done, that one more blind date would be his last attempt before accepting that connection wasn't meant for people like him." He turned to Harper, smiling. "And I watched Harper argue with me for 40 minutes about corporate environmental responsibility, this brilliant, passionate woman who'd been dismissed and underestimated so many times she decided she was done too. Two people exhausted by pretense who'd both planned their last blind dates." Marcus raised his glass. "Thank God they found someone willing to be real." The guests cheered as waves provided percussion, and Jensen kissed his wife while the sun set over the ocean that had witnessed their beginning. Years later, people would ask Jensen about the transformation. How did a ruthless CEO known for maximizing profit become an advocate for sustainable development? When did Long Enterprises pivot from pure financial gain to environmental responsibility? The answer was always the same. I remembered who I was before I forgot. Long Enterprises still thrived, but differently now. Eco-development projects replaced environmentally destructive deals. Sustainability consultants joined the board. The company's mission statement, once focused solely on shareholder value, now included environmental stewardship. Some investors left, new ones, aligned with the vision, arrived. Jensen split his time between boardrooms and beaches, between quarterly reports and coral reef restoration. He was still CEO, still successful, still respected, but now he was also Jen, the man who got his hands dirty at beach cleanups, who could explain marine ecosystems with genuine passion, who remembered why he'd cared about more than money. Harper continued her consulting work, but now with a partner who understood and supported it. She spoke at conferences with Jensen in the audience, challenged corporations with him, beside her, built projects with resources he helped provide. They were equals in every sense, two people who'd found partnership instead of performance. "He listens," Harper told an interviewer years into their marriage. "He challenges himself and chose growth over comfort repeatedly. He learned vulnerability because I refused to love a performance. The cold CEO everyone warned me about? That was armor, not identity. Underneath was someone who'd forgotten how to feel, and I just reminded him. Jensen's version was simpler. Harper saved my life by refusing to be impressed by my life. She wanted the person underneath, and she wouldn't accept anything less. She saw through walls I didn't even know I'd built. But the truest version required both of them, speaking together. We saved each other from successful loneliness." Their evenings were spent working on conservation projects side by side. Their weekends involved the beach cleanups where they'd first connected. Their arguments were real, their laughter genuine, their partnership built on the foundation of two people who refused to accept less than authentic love. Because real love, they'd discovered, Doesn't happen in crystal chandeliers and designer suits. It doesn't happen across formal restaurant tables where everyone's performing their best selves. It happens on storm-swept beaches when two people choose vulnerability over safety. It happens in neighborhood wine bars when someone asks who you are beneath your titles. It happens when two exhausted souls finally stop performing and start being real. Sometimes cold CEOs and idealistic consultants discover that the best partnerships don't complete you. They challenge you to become who you were meant to be all along. They don't save you from loneliness. They remind you why connection matters. They don't rescue you. They see you as equal and demand you see yourself the same way. Jensen and Harper built a life that wasn't perfect, but it was real. That was enough. That was everything. And on their anniversary each year, they returned to that beach where it had all begun, where a man in an expensive suit and a woman in a rain-damp dress had chosen authenticity over pretense, vulnerability over armor, connection over isolation, where two people planning their last blind dates had found each other instead. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment about the person who saw the real you beneath your armor, who refused to let you hide, who challenged you to be authentic. Those people change everything. They don't rescue us. They remind us we were worth knowing all along. Because sometimes the last chance is actually the first real one. And sometimes the person who refuses to be impressed by your facade is exactly who you need.